My name is Lauren Hayes. I'm 32 years old, and I was laughing when my cousin mocked me at that family dinner. But inside, my chest was burning like someone had poured gasoline on my pride and lit a match. Everyone at the table heard it. The cruel comparison, the dismissive tone, the way he painted my life as a joke. And not a single person stopped him. That was the moment I made a choice that would change everything. I chose silence over defense. And let me tell you, that silence became the most powerful weapon I've ever used. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because no matter where you are, I think you'll understand exactly what I felt that night. You won't believe what happened next, because what started as humiliation at a dinner table turned into the sweetest, quietest revenge I could have ever imagined. If this story is hitting close to home already, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. You're going to want to see how this unfolds. Trust me. The title of this video says it all. When family mocks you, sometimes the best response isn't a comeback. It's becoming undeniable. So let me take you back to where it all started, to the moment my world shifted, and I realized that proving myself to people who wanted me to fail was never the goal. Outgrowing them was. Have you ever been betrayed by people who were supposed to support you? Have you ever sat at a table surrounded by family and felt completely alone? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this story is about more than revenge. It's about reclaiming your power when everyone else tries to take it away. Now let me tell you exactly how this all began, and why that one terrible night became the catalyst for the most transformative year of my life. Family dinners used to feel safe, like a warm blanket I could wrap myself in after a long week. My husband, Daniel, and I would drive to his parents' house every other Sunday, and I'd walk in expecting laughter, good food, and the kind of comfort that only family gatherings can bring. But that night, the night everything changed, I walked into their dining room and felt the air shift the moment I sat down. My cousin-in-law, Marcus, was there, loud as always, and I could already sense something brewing in the way he kept glancing at me with that smirk I'd learned to recognize over the years. The joke started small, harmless little jabs about my job, my car, the fact that Daniel and I hadn't bought a house yet. Everyone laughed, and I laughed too, because that's what you do when you're trying to keep the peace, right? Before I continue, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button if you've ever felt the sting of being the punchline in your own family, because what comes next is going to show you exactly how I turned that pain into power. Marcus leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Lauren, when are you going to stop playing around with that little job of yours and actually do something with your life? I mean, look at Stephanie. She's already managing a whole team and you're still, what, answering emails?" The table went silent for half a second, then erupted in uncomfortable laughter. My face burned, but I kept smiling, kept nodding, kept pretending his words didn't feel like knives. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, but he didn't say a word. Not to Marcus, not to anyone. His parents smiled politely and changed the subject, but the damage was done. I looked around that table and realized something that made my stomach twist. They enjoyed this. Not openly, not viciously, but there was a comfort in keeping me small, in making sure I stayed the family member who hadn't made it yet. That night, I drove home in silence, tears streaming down my face, and I made a decision that would define the next chapter of my life. I would never defend myself to them again, but I would also never stop proving them wrong. The worst part wasn't the dinner itself, it was what came after. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing echoes of Marcus's words in conversations with other family members. My sister-in-law, Jenna, casually mentioned during a phone call, "So I heard things are still pretty tight for you guys financially." And I knew exactly where she'd heard that from. Daniel's mom started asking me pointed questions about my career goals, with this tone that made it clear she thought I didn't have any. Every interaction felt like a test I was failing, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I'd become the family's cautionary tale, the one who didn't measure up, who didn't have her life together. I started dreading family events, making excuses to skip birthdays and holiday gatherings. Daniel noticed, of course, but he didn't push me to explain because deep down, I think he knew. He'd seen the way his family treated me, the subtle condescension disguised as concern, and he was caught between defending me and keeping the peace with the people who raised him. I didn't blame him. but I also didn't rely on him to fix it. This was my battle, and I was starting to realize that fighting back with words would only make me look defensive, bitter, small. So instead, I swallowed my anger and channeled it into something else entirely. A quiet, relentless determination to change my life on my own terms. At night, alone in our apartment, I'd replay Marcus's words in my head like a broken record. When are you going to actually do something with your life? The question haunted me, not because I believed it, but because I knew he did, and so did the rest of them. But here's the thing about humiliation. It can either crush you, or it can become the fire that forges something stronger. I chose the latter. I started researching, planning, taking notes on skills I could learn and opportunities I could create. No one knew what I was doing, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Because revenge, I was learning, isn't loud. It's patient, strategic, and devastating when it finally arrives. Daniel was a good man. I want to make that clear from the start. He loved me, supported me in his own quiet way, and never intentionally made me feel less than. But when it came to his family, he had this deep-rooted fear of confrontation that left me standing alone in rooms full of people who should have had my back. That night at dinner, when Marcus tore me apart with his words, Daniel's hand squeezed mine under the table, but his mouth stayed shut. I felt that silence like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, suffocating me while everyone else laughed and moved on like nothing had happened. In the days that followed, I tried talking to him about it, gently at first, then more directly. Why didn't you say something? Why did you let him talk to me like that? I asked one evening as we sat on our couch, the TV playing something neither of us was watching. Daniel sighed, ran his hand through his hair, and said, "Lauren, you know how Marcus is. If I'd said something, it would have just made it worse. My family, they're complicated. I didn't want to start a fight." His words stung more than Marcus's insults ever could, because in that moment, I realized he valued their comfort over my dignity. If you've ever felt invisible to the one person who's supposed to see you, hit subscribe and leave a like. Because what I'm about to tell you next is how I learned to see myself, even when no one else did. I didn't argue with him that night because I understood something fundamental about Daniel's relationship with his family. He was still trying to earn their approval, just like I was. The difference was, I was tired of trying. His silence wasn't malicious. It was survival, a learned behavior from years of avoiding his parents' judgment and his relatives' drama. But his survival came at my expense, and I couldn't keep sacrificing my self-worth at the altar of family peace. So I made another decision. I wouldn't ask him to fight my battles, and I wouldn't resent him for not volunteering. Instead, I would build something so undeniable that even his silence couldn't diminish it. Little did I know, this decision would shift the entire dynamic of our marriage in ways neither of us could have predicted. There's a special kind of pain that comes from being present, but invisible, from sitting in a room full of people and knowing that if you disappeared, no one would notice until they needed something from you. That's how I felt at every family gathering after that dinner, like a piece of furniture that blended into the background, functional, but forgettable. They'd talk around me, not to me, and when they did address me directly, it was always with that patronizing tone people use when they've already decided you're not worth their full attention. I'd smile, nod, contribute when appropriate, and then drive home feeling like I'd been erased a little more each time. The comparisons were relentless, always disguised as innocent conversation, but sharp enough to draw blood. "Did you hear Stephanie got promoted again? She's making 6 figures now," Jenna would say, looking at me with those wide, fake sympathetic eyes. "And Jacob just bought his second investment property. Can you believe it? He's only 29, Marcus would add, his voice dripping with pride that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with making sure I knew where I stood in the family hierarchy. Success in their eyes was measured in money, titles, and material accomplishments, the kind of things you could show off at dinner parties and post about on social media. I had none of those things, at least not yet, and they made sure I felt the weight of that absence every single time we were together. My job as a customer service coordinator wasn't glamorous, and our small apartment wasn't Instagram-worthy. Daniel and I were comfortable, not wealthy, stable but not spectacular, and in a family obsessed with outward success that made me, a failure. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, and wonder if they were right. Maybe I wasn't ambitious enough. Maybe I was settling. Maybe I really was wasting my potential. But then, the anger would rise again, hot and clarifying, and I'd remember that their definition of success wasn't mine, and proving them wrong didn't mean becoming like them. The comparisons became a game to them, a sport they played every time we gathered, and I was always the losing team. Marcus would start it, casually dropping someone's name into conversation like a grenade, and then the others would pile on, each one adding another layer of evidence that I wasn't measuring up. "You remember Sarah from church? She just launched her own business. Already made $20,000 in her first month," his mother would say, her eyes flickering to me with that knowing look. "And Thomas, Daniel's college friend? He's a VP now. Can you imagine? VP at 33. The words would echo around the table, bouncing off walls and settling into my bones like poison. What made it unbearable wasn't just the comparisons themselves. It was the way they delivered them, with smiles and laughter, as if they weren't systematically dismantling my sense of worth with every sentence. They'd look at me expectantly, waiting for me to respond, to defend myself, to explain why I hadn't achieved what all these other people had. And for a while, I tried. I'd mention projects I was working on, skills I was learning, small victories that felt significant to me but sounded pathetic when spoken aloud in that room. "That's nice, sweetie," Daniel's mom would say, patting my hand like I was a child who'd just shown her a crayon drawing. "But when are you going to do something bigger?" The loudest moments were always when Marcus got drunk, which happened at almost every gathering. His voice would boom across the room, cutting through other conversations, demanding attention as he held court about success and ambition and making something of yourself. He'd point at me sometimes, not aggressively, but mockingly, like I was a visual aid for his lecture on what not to do with your life. "Look, I'm not saying Lauren's lazy," he'd announce to everyone. "I'm just saying some people are content with mediocrity, and that's okay. Not everyone can be a winner." The table would go quiet, a few uncomfortable laughs escaping, and I'd sit there frozen, my face burning, my hands clenched so tight under the table that my nails left marks in my palms. But I never responded. I never gave him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Every fiber of my being screamed to defend myself, to stand up at that table and tell them everything they didn't know about my life, my plans, my worth. I wanted to explain that I was taking online courses in digital marketing, that I'd been building a portfolio in my spare time, that I had ideas and ambitions they couldn't see because they'd never bothered to ask. I wanted to correct Marcus's lies, to tell him that my job wasn't meaningless. It paid our bills, kept us stable, and gave me the flexibility to invest in my future. But every time I opened my mouth to speak, I'd see their faces, skeptical, dismissive, already bored with whatever I was about to say, and the words would die in my throat. Explaining yourself to people who enjoy your pain is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it'll never be enough. I learned this the hard way, through months of trying to make them understand, trying to earn their respect with explanations and justifications that only made me look more desperate. The more I defended myself, the smaller I felt, because defense implies guilt, and I had nothing to be guilty for. If you've ever wasted your energy trying to prove yourself to people who were never going to believe in you anyway, make sure you're subscribed and drop a like, because what I did next changed everything, and I want you to see how choosing silence over explanation became my greatest power move. So I stopped. I stopped explaining, stopped defending, stopped trying to make them see me the way I saw myself. Instead, I started taking notes, mental records of every insult, every comparison, every dismissive comment. I memorized the way Marcus's eyes gleamed when he tore me down, the way Daniel's parents nodded along like he was speaking truth instead of cruelty. I cataloged every moment of humiliation and stored it away, not as a wound to nurse, but as fuel to burn. Because I realized something powerful in those quiet, painful moments. Their opinion of me only mattered if I gave it power, and I was done being a supporting character in their story of my life. This was my story, and I was about to rewrite every single chapter. There's a moment of clarity that comes when you finally understand who's in your corner and who's sitting in the stands hoping you'll fall. For me, that moment came about 2 months after the disastrous dinner, during a smaller family brunch at Jenna's house. I'd made the mistake of mentioning a freelance project I'd picked up. Nothing huge, just some social media management for a local boutique, and I was genuinely excited about it. It was my first step toward building something outside my regular job, a quiet victory I thought might earn me a shred of recognition. Instead, Marcus laughed so hard he nearly choked on his mimosa. Wait, he said, wiping his eyes like I'd just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. You're managing Instagram for a shop that probably has, 200 followers? Lauren, that's not a career move. That's a hobby. The table erupted in laughter, and even Jenna, who I thought had been warming up to me, couldn't hide her smirk. Daniel's jaw tightened, but again he said nothing, and I felt something inside me snap, not break, but snap into place, like a bone that had been out of joint finally finding its correct position. I smiled, took a sip of my orange juice, and decided right then that this would be the last time I ever shared anything real with these people. That afternoon, I went home and did something I should have done months earlier. I unfollowed all of them on social media, muted our family group chat, and stopped checking in with updates about my life. If they wanted to know what I was doing, they'd have to ask directly, and I already knew they wouldn't. They were too busy celebrating their own wins and manufacturing mine into failures. The silence that followed was jarring at first, like stepping out of a noisy room into sudden quiet, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing for an audience that booed no matter what I did. I was free to build, to fail, to grow without commentary, and that freedom became the foundation of everything that came next. Instead of speaking, I started watching, really watching, how they operated, what mattered to them, what impressed them. I noticed that Marcus only respected people who could match his bravado with tangible results, people who walked into rooms with titles and bank accounts that demanded attention. Daniel's parents valued stability and status, the kind of success that looked good in Christmas cards and family newsletters. Jenna craved validation through comparison, constantly measuring herself against others to feel superior. They were all playing the same game, just with different strategies, and I'd been losing because I didn't even know I was supposed to be playing. So I swallowed my words, my anger, my desperate need to be seen, and I took notes instead. I started a journal where I wrote down everything, their comments, my feelings, but more importantly, my goals. What did I actually want? Not what would impress them, but what would make me feel fulfilled, powerful, genuinely successful. I wrote pages and pages, late into the night while Daniel slept, mapping out a version of my life that had nothing to do with their approval and everything to do with my own ambition. I researched careers in digital marketing, watched tutorials, took free courses, and slowly began to understand that I had skills they didn't even know existed. The transformation wasn't dramatic or immediate. It was quiet, methodical, almost invisible to anyone watching from the outside. I worked my regular job during the day, then spent my evenings and weekends building a portfolio, reaching out to small businesses, offering my services at rates low enough to get experience, but high enough to be taken seriously. I failed constantly. Pitches got rejected, projects fell through, clients disappeared, but I kept going because every failure taught me something, and every small victory proved that Marcus was wrong. I wasn't content with mediocrity. I was building something real, something mine, and the fact that they couldn't see it yet made it even more satisfying. Patience, I was learning, is revenge in slow motion. Not every moment was empowering, though. Let me be honest about that. There were nights when the weight of their words crushed me, when I'd stand in the shower letting the water run hot enough to burn, tears streaming down my face mixing with the steam until I couldn't tell which was which. The shower became my safe space, the only place where I could let the facade drop and admit how much their rejection hurt. I'd press my forehead against the tile and sob, not because I believed they were right about me, but because it's exhausting to be strong all the time, to carry the weight of proving yourself when you're already tired from just existing. Daniel never heard me cry. I made sure of that. He was dealing with his own guilt about not defending me, and I didn't want to add my pain to his burden. Besides, Crying to him felt like asking for something he couldn't give me, which was the courage to stand up to his family. So I kept my breakdowns private, timed perfectly to the sound of running water and locked doors. If you've ever hidden your tears because you didn't want to seem weak, or if you've carried pain alone because no one else could handle it, hit that subscribe button and leave a like, because this story is about to show you that those private moments of vulnerability aren't weakness. They're the foundation of unshakable strength. But here's what those shower tears taught me. Emotions aren't the enemy of success. Suppression is. Every time I cried, I released the poison their words had injected into me, and every time I stepped out of that shower, I felt a little lighter, a little more determined. Tears weren't weakness, they were maintenance, a necessary purge that kept me from internalizing their toxicity. I learned to honor my pain without letting it define me, to acknowledge that yes, their words hurt, and no, that didn't make me fragile. Some of the strongest people I know have cried in showers, in cars, in quiet moments when no one's watching, because strength isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking in private and rebuilding in public. For the longest time, I thought crying meant I was giving in, that every tear was evidence Marcus had been right about me, that I was soft, unmotivated, incapable of handling real pressure. I'd grown up in a culture that treated emotions like character flaws, especially for women trying to prove themselves in spaces that didn't want them. So I fought against my tears, clenched my jaw through the pain, and wore my composure like armor. But the thing about armor is that it's heavy, and eventually, it weighs you down more than it protects you. The breakthrough came one particularly brutal night, about 4 months after that initial dinner. I'd just lost a potential client, someone I'd spent weeks courting, crafting the perfect pitch, imagining how this project could be the one that finally validated all my effort. They chose someone else, someone with more experience and a more impressive portfolio, and the rejection email hit me like a physical blow. I made it to the shower before I completely fell apart, sliding down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, water pouring over me while I sobbed so hard I thought I might throw up. And then something shifted. As the tears flowed, I felt something else flowing out with them, fear. Fear that I wasn't good enough, fear that Marcus and his family were right, fear that I'd been deluding myself this entire time. The tears washed it away, leaving behind something clearer, sharper, more focused. When I finally stood up and turned off the water, I wasn't broken. I was empty in the best possible way, like a container that had been filled with poison and was now clean, ready to be filled with something better. I looked at myself in the mirror, mascara-streaked and red-eyed, and made a promise. I would fail as many times as it took, cry as many tears as I needed, but I would never stop moving forward. That night, tears stopped being my enemy and became my reset button. There's a version of me that died in that shower, and I don't say that dramatically, I mean it literally. The woman who needed her in-laws' approval, who flinched at Marcus's mockery, who measured her worth by their impossible standards, she drowned in those tears and never came back. What emerged in her place was someone colder, more calculated, someone who understood that kindness without boundaries is just self-destruction with a smile. I wasn't going to be cruel or vindictive, but I was done being soft in a family that mistook softness for weakness. That night marked the beginning of a transformation I couldn't have predicted, one that would reshape not just my career, but my entire sense of identity. The hardening wasn't immediate. It was gradual, like metal being tempered in fire, heated and cooled repeatedly until it becomes unbreakable. Every rejected pitch made me sharper. Every family gathering I skipped made me stronger. Every time Daniel asked why I was being distant with his family, and I simply smiled and changed the subject, I felt the armor clicking into place, piece by piece. I stopped explaining myself to anyone, stopped seeking validation from people whose opinions were based on ignorance. My worth wasn't up for debate anymore, and that shift in perspective changed everything about how I moved through the world. I started saying no without apology, no to last-minute family dinners, no to guilt trips about missing birthdays, no to phone calls that only came when someone needed something from me. Daniel struggled with it at first, caught between his loyalty to his family and his love for me, but eventually, he adapted. He had to, because the alternative was losing me, and somewhere deep down, He knew I was right. His family had taken advantage of my people-pleasing nature for years, and now that I'd stopped performing, they didn't know what to do with me. Good. Let them be confused. Let them wonder what changed. Little did they know, everything was about to change in ways they couldn't ignore. The invitations kept coming. Sunday dinners, birthday parties, holiday celebrations, but my attendance became sporadic, then rare, then nearly non-existent. At first, they reached out with concern that felt more like curiosity. "Is everything okay? We haven't seen you in a while," Daniel's mom would text, and I'd respond with something vague and polite. "Just busy with work, sorry." But the truth was, I wasn't sorry at all. Every event I skipped was time I could invest in myself, in my business, in building the life they said I'd never have. The guilt that used to eat at me for missing family obligations vanished, replaced by a clarity that felt almost ruthless. These people didn't deserve access to my time, my energy, or my progress. Daniel went to most of the gatherings alone, and I could see the strain it put on him. The questions he had to field about my absence, the assumptions his family made about our marriage. "They think we're having problems," he told me one evening, frustration clear in his voice. "They think you're pulling away from me, not just them." I looked at him calmly and said, "Let them think whatever they want. You know the truth, and that's all that matters." It was harsh, maybe, but necessary. I was done managing other people's perceptions of me, done performing happiness for an audience that only showed up to watch me fail. My absence spoke louder than my presence ever could, and the silence I left behind made them uncomfortable in ways my words never had. What surprised me was how little I missed them. I'd spent so much time dreading family events, forcing myself to attend out of obligation, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have free weekends, quiet Sundays, time to breathe without the constant pressure of being evaluated and found wanting. My life became simpler, more focused, and ironically, happier without them in it. I poured all that reclaimed time and energy into my freelance work, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things started to shift. Clients turned into referrals. One-off projects became retainer agreements. My portfolio grew from a handful of amateur work to a collection of campaigns I was genuinely proud of. And through it all, they had no idea, because I'd stopped giving updates about anything that mattered. There's a freedom that comes with giving up on convincing people who've already made up their minds about you. For years, I'd exhausted myself explaining why I chose the job I had, why Daniel and I weren't rushing to buy a house, why my timeline didn't match theirs. Every defense felt like begging for scraps of respect from people who'd already decided I wasn't worth the full meal. But once I stopped defending myself, once I accepted that their respect wasn't something I could earn through explanations, the power dynamic shifted entirely. They no longer had ammunition because I stopped providing targets. The next time Jenna made a comment about my little projects, I just smiled and said, "Yeah, they keep me busy," then changed the subject. No elaboration, no justification, no defensive explanation about how those little projects were actually generating income. When Marcus asked at a rare family gathering I did attend, "So Lauren, still doing the same old thing?" I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Something like that," then turned to talk to someone else. The confusion on his face was delicious. He was so used to me squirming under his scrutiny that my indifference threw him completely off balance. Without my reactions to fuel his mockery, he lost interest, moved on to easier targets, and I realized that bullies need engagement to survive. Daniel noticed the change immediately. "You're different with them now," he said one night. Not accusatory, but observant. Colder. I thought about that word, colder, and realized he was both right and wrong. I wasn't cold. I was boundaried. I wasn't distant. I was protected. I'd simply stopped letting them in, stopped giving them access to the parts of me they'd only ever used as target practice. And honestly, it felt incredible. My choices were mine again, not up for family debate or democratic vote. My life became something I lived rather than something I defended, and that shift freed up so much mental and emotional energy that I barely recognized myself. The woman who used to rehearse explanations in the car before family dinners was gone, replaced by someone who didn't owe anyone an explanation for existing exactly as she was. In the absence of their noise, I found my own voice, Not the defensive, apologetic voice I'd used at family dinners, but something clearer, more confident, more authentically mine. Silence wasn't emptiness. It was space, room to think and plan and execute without constant interruption from people who didn't have my best interests at heart. I stopped consuming their opinions and started producing my own results, and the difference was staggering. Every hour I didn't spend at a family gathering was an hour I could spend learning a new skill, reaching out to potential clients, refining my craft. Silence became both my protection and my laboratory. I got strategic about everything. I studied successful digital marketers, analyzed their strategies, learned what worked and what didn't. I invested in a few key courses that actually moved the needle, not the cheap ones that promised everything and delivered nothing. I practiced pitching until my emails were sharp, professional, impossible to ignore. I built relationships with other freelancers, collaborated on projects, learned from people who were further along the path I wanted to travel. All of this happened in the quiet space I'd created by removing toxic voices from my life. And the progress I made during those months was exponential compared to the years I'd spent seeking approval. The training ground of silence taught me something crucial. You can't build anything meaningful while constantly defending its foundation. Construction requires focus, and focus requires peace, and peace requires boundaries. So I built mine high and strong, not to keep everyone out, but to keep the wrong people from disrupting what I was creating. Daniel adapted, my real friends understood, and my in-laws, well, they barely noticed at first. They were too busy with their own lives, their own dramas, their own obsession with status and appearances. And that was fine by me, because while they were busy looking impressive, I was busy becoming undeniable. The difference between those two things would soon become very, very clear. My days became a carefully choreographed dance between obligation and ambition. I'd wake up at 5:30, a full 2 hours before I needed to be at my regular job, and I'd work on my freelance projects in the quiet darkness of our apartment while Daniel slept. There was something almost sacred about those early morning hours. The world was still asleep, the phone wasn't ringing, and I could focus completely on building something that was entirely mine. I'd drink my coffee in silence, headphones on, diving into client campaigns and strategy documents with a level of concentration I never could have achieved if anyone knew what I was doing. My regular job became easier to tolerate once I stopped seeing it as my identity and started treating it as my funding source. It paid the bills, provided health insurance, and gave me the stability I needed to take risks with my freelance work. I stopped complaining about it, stopped feeling ashamed of it, and instead felt grateful for the safety net it provided. Then, as soon as 5 o'clock hit, I'd come home, eat a quick dinner with Daniel, and disappear back into my laptop until midnight or later. He thought I was watching shows or scrolling social media, and I let him think that because explaining felt like jinxing it. This was mine, my secret garden, and I wasn't ready to let anyone else in yet. The exhaustion was real. Some weeks I was running on 4 or 5 hours of sleep, fueled by coffee and spite in equal measure. My eyes burned, my back ached from hunching over my laptop, and there were mornings I could barely drag myself out of bed. But every time I wanted to quit, I'd remember Marcus's face, that smug smile as he asked when I was going to do something with my life. I'd remember the way Daniel's parents looked at me like I was a burden their son had to carry. I'd remember every dismissive comment, every comparison, every moment they made me feel small, and I'd keep working. Pain became fuel. Exhaustion became determination, and the unseen hours became my greatest advantage because no one could sabotage what they didn't know existed. Family gatherings continued without me, and through Daniel's occasional updates, I'd hear about what I was missing. The same jokes recycled for the 100th time, the same conversations about who bought what and who achieved what, the same toxic competition disguised as connection. Marcus would still hold court, apparently, getting louder with each drink. Daniel's parents would still mediate and judge in equal measure, and Jenna would still find ways to make everything about her latest accomplishment. They were stuck in a loop, replaying the same dynamics over and over, while I was evolving in ways they couldn't see and wouldn't understand even if they could. While Marcus was telling the story about his first big sale for the millionth time, I was learning advanced Facebook advertising strategies. While Jenna was posting filtered photos of her perfect life, I was building actual systems that generated real results for real businesses. While Daniel's parents were obsessing over which family member's child got into which prestigious school, I was mastering SEO, email marketing funnels, conversion optimization, and client retention strategies. The skills I was accumulating weren't just theoretical. They were practical, marketable, valuable in ways that translated directly into income and opportunity. The beautiful irony was that they thought they were winning. In their minds, I'd retreated because I couldn't compete, disappeared because I'd accepted my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. They probably pitied me, or worse, forgot about me entirely, except when they needed a cautionary tale about wasted potential. And that was perfect, because the best transformations happen in the dark, away from eyes that would doubt or sabotage. I wasn't building skills to impress them. I was building skills to eclipse them, and the difference between those two goals meant everything. Impressing them would have required their attention. Eclipsing them only required my consistency. There were so many moments during those months when I questioned everything I was doing. The results weren't immediate or dramatic. Most days felt like I was throwing effort into a void and getting nothing back. I'd send 20 pitches and get 2 responses. I'd pour hours into a campaign only to see mediocre results. I'd watch other marketers on social media seemingly crush it overnight while I was still grinding in obscurity. It felt like planting seeds in complete darkness, with no sunlight, no water, no guarantee that anything would ever grow. Just faith, discipline, and a stubbornness that refused to let Marcus be right about me. But I kept planting anyway, because I understood something fundamental that they didn't. Real growth doesn't happen overnight, and anything worth building requires patience that looks foolish to people who only value instant results. Every skill I learned was a seed. Every client relationship I nurtured was a seed. Every failure I learned from was a seed. I couldn't see the forest yet, but I could feel the soil shifting beneath my hands, could sense that something was taking root even if I couldn't prove it. And unlike their version of success, which required constant external validation and performance, mine was happening quietly, internally, in ways that couldn't be measured by dinner table conversations. Daniel would sometimes ask what I was working on so intensely, and I'd give vague answers that satisfied his curiosity without revealing the full scope of what I was building. Just some freelance stuff, I'd say, and he'd nod and move on, content with the surface explanation. Part of me wanted to tell him everything, to share my hopes and fears and the sheer scale of what I was attempting, but another part of me knew that speaking dreams aloud before they're strong enough to withstand scrutiny can kill them. So I kept planting in the dark, trusting that eventually, inevitably, something would break through the surface, and when it did, it would be undeniable. Let me be brutally honest. There were days I wanted to quit everything, delete my portfolio, shut down my laptop, and just accept that maybe they were right. Days when a client would ghost me after weeks of work, or a campaign would completely flop, or I'd see someone younger and less experienced land an opportunity I'd been chasing for months. Those days, doubt didn't whisper. It screamed. It roared. It filled every corner of my mind with vicious certainty that I was delusional, that I was wasting my time, that Marcus's mockery was actually just uncomfortable truth I'd been too proud to accept. The worst day came about 8 months into my silent transformation. I'd been working with a client for 3 months, building their entire social media strategy from scratch, pouring creativity and effort into content that was finally gaining traction. Then they fired me via email. No explanation, no warning, just a cold 2-sentence message thanking me for my work and informing me they were going in a different direction. I later found out through mutual connections that they'd hired Marcus's company, an established marketing firm with name recognition and a team. The betrayal felt cosmic, like the universe itself was confirming that I'd never escape his shadow. I didn't shower cry that night. I full-on sobbed in bed, the kind of crying that shakes your whole body and leaves you gasping for air. Daniel held me, confused and concerned, and I finally told him some of what I'd been doing, how hard I'd been working, how much this particular loss hurt. He said all the right things, that I was talented, that it was their loss, that I shouldn't give up, but his words felt hollow against the weight of my doubt. That night, I seriously considered quitting, going back to just being the family disappointment who at least wasn't also a failure at her secret dreams. But then morning came, and with it, a text from another potential client who'd been referred to me by someone I'd worked with months earlier. One opportunity closing, another opening. The seeds were growing, even when I couldn't see them. What pulled me through the darkest moments wasn't belief in myself, it was spite. Pure, crystallized spite that I'm not ashamed to admit became my most reliable fuel. When motivation failed, when inspiration dried up, when every logical part of my brain told me to quit, I'd close my eyes and remember Marcus's face at that dinner table, the way his eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he tore me down. I'd remember Daniel's parents' polite smiles that barely masked their disappointment. I'd remember Jenna's fake sympathy and the way the whole family treated my life like a cautionary tale. And then I'd open my eyes and get back to work. People talk about positive motivation, about chasing your dreams and following your passion, but sometimes the most powerful motivation is proving people wrong, not for their benefit. They didn't deserve the satisfaction of knowing they'd motivated me, but for mine, for the vindication of watching their faces when they realized they'd underestimated me. Every time I wanted to quit, I'd ask myself, do you really want to give Marcus the satisfaction of being right? Do you want to prove them all correct? And the answer was always, screaming from every cell in my body, absolutely not. I would rather die trying than live knowing I'd confirmed their worst assumptions about me. So I kept going. Through the rejections and the failures and the moments of crushing self-doubt, I kept showing up, kept improving, kept planting those seeds in the dark. I turned their mockery into a highlight reel that played in my head whenever I needed strength, not to torture myself, but to remind myself why I'd started this journey in the first place. They'd taken so much from me, my confidence, my sense of belonging, my peace at family gatherings. But they couldn't take my future unless I let them. And I'd decided months ago that I wouldn't let them take one more thing. Their faces became my fuel, and spite became my superpower. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing my humiliation as something to recover from and started seeing it as something to leverage. The pain of that initial dinner, the accumulated weight of every dismissive comment and cruel comparison, it stopped being a wound I was nursing and became a resource I was mining. This shift was subtle but profound. Instead of trying to heal from their cruelty, I transformed it into energy, into drive, into the relentless work ethic that separated me from people who only worked when they felt motivated. I worked especially hard when I felt broken, because that's when I needed the progress most. Pain has this interesting quality. It can either paralyze you or propel you, and the difference comes down to what you do with it. For years, I'd let their words paralyze me, lock me in cycles of self-doubt and defensive explanation. But once I started channeling that pain into productive action, it became the most reliable fuel source I'd ever known. Motivation is fickle. Enthusiasm comes and goes. But pain? Pain is constant, especially when you carry it intentionally. I learned to metabolize hurt the way athletes metabolize lactic acid during training. It burned, but it also built strength. The prison I'd been living in wasn't made of their opinions, it was made of my need for their approval. Once I stopped seeking their validation, their words lost the power to cage me. They could mock all they wanted, compare me to whoever they pleased, judge my choices from here to eternity, and none of it mattered anymore because I'd stopped giving them authority over my self-worth. The pain they'd caused didn't disappear, but it stopped defining me. Instead, it refined me, burning away everything that wasn't essential, everything that wasn't mine. I emerged from that furnace harder, clearer, and absolutely certain that the best revenge wasn't anger or confrontation. It was becoming so successful they couldn't ignore it, so undeniable they'd choke on their past judgments. The turning point didn't announce itself with fireworks or dramatic music. It came in the form of a LinkedIn message from someone I'd worked with 6 months earlier. Her name was Rebecca, and she ran operations for a mid-sized e-commerce company that was struggling with their digital presence. We'd worked together on a small project that I'd honestly half forgotten about, but apparently she hadn't forgotten me. Lauren, I know this is out of the blue, but we're looking for someone to overhaul our entire marketing strategy. Your name keeps coming up in conversations. Would you be interested in discussing a long-term contract?" I read the message 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. The contract they offered was substantial, more than I made in 6 months at my regular job, with the potential for ongoing work if the initial campaign performed well. My hands shook as I typed my response, trying to sound professional and confident when inside I was screaming with excitement and terror in equal measure. This was it, the opportunity I'd been working toward, the seed that had finally broken through the surface. But I didn't post about it on social media, didn't call Daniel's family to share the news, didn't even tell Daniel the full scope of what had just landed in my lap. This was mine, and I was keeping it protected until it was so solid no one could diminish it. I negotiated the terms carefully, professionally, drawing on every piece of knowledge I'd accumulated during those late nights and early mornings. We settled on a 3-month initial contract with clear deliverables and metrics for success. The day I signed it, I sat alone in our apartment, laptop open, staring at the digital signature on the screen, and let myself feel the weight of what I'd just accomplished. No celebration, no champagne, no victory dance, just quiet recognition that I'd done what they said I couldn't. The work was about to get harder, the stakes higher, but for the first time in over a year, I felt like I was playing a game I could actually win. The hardest part about success is keeping it quiet when every cell in your body wants to scream it from rooftops. I wanted to post on Facebook, tag Marcus and Jenna and every family member who'd ever doubted me, write a long caption about perseverance and proving people wrong. I wanted to show up at the next family dinner with my contract printed out, slap it on the table, and watch their faces twist with shock and reluctant respect. But I didn't do any of that, because I understood something crucial. Premature celebration invites premature sabotage, and I wasn't ready for them to know yet. So I kept working in silence, executing the campaign for Rebecca's company with every ounce of skill and creativity I possessed. The results started coming in within weeks. Engagement rates climbing, conversion rates improving, actual measurable ROI that made Rebecca message me almost daily with excited updates. "Lauren, I don't know how you're doing this, but whatever it is, keep doing it," she wrote after our 2nd month. The success felt surreal, like I'd stepped through a doorway into a parallel version of my life where things actually worked out, where effort translated into results, where I wasn't the family disappointment but someone genuinely good at what she did. Daniel noticed changes, noticed I was happier, more confident, less bothered by his family's opinions. But I kept the details vague. "Work is going really well," I'd say, and he'd smile and say he was proud of me, and that was enough. The family continued existing in their own bubble, completely unaware that the person they'd written off was building something they'd soon be forced to acknowledge. Every day I kept quiet was a day I got stronger, more established, more undeniable, and when the time came to reveal what I'd been doing, and it would come, I was certain of that. I wanted the reveal to be so complete, so overwhelming, that there would be no room for dismissal or diminishment. One of the most liberating realizations I had during this period was understanding that my success didn't require an audience to be legitimate. For so long, I'd unconsciously believed that achievements only counted if other people acknowledged them, that progress wasn't real unless it was witnessed and validated. But working in silence taught me the opposite, that the most authentic growth happens away from public scrutiny, in the private moments when you're accountable only to yourself and your own standards. My bank account knew I was succeeding. My clients knew. I knew. That was enough. There's a particular kind of confidence that comes from building something without external validation, a quiet certainty that can't be shaken because it's not dependent on anyone else's opinion. When your success is public from the beginning, you become vulnerable to other people's doubts, their skepticism, their well-meaning but soul-crushing advice about why your approach won't work. But when you build in private and only reveal once it's undeniable, you bypass all of that noise. You protect your dreams during their most fragile stages, and by the time anyone else sees them, they're already strong enough to withstand scrutiny. I watched other freelancers posting constantly about every small win, every new client, every milestone, and I understood the impulse. Validation feels good, Celebration connects you to community. But I also noticed how many of them burned out quickly, how the pressure of public accountability became its own kind of prison. They were performing success before they'd actually achieved it, exhausting themselves maintaining an image rather than building a foundation. My silence was strategic, protective, and ultimately far more powerful than any social media announcement could have been. When I finally did reveal what I'd built, it wouldn't be a promise or a hope. It would be undeniable proof. Even with Rebecca's contract and the steady stream of results proving my capability, doubt still found ways to creep in. There were moments during campaign execution when I'd second-guess every decision, convinced I was about to be exposed as a fraud who'd somehow gotten lucky once but couldn't replicate success. Imposter syndrome hit hardest at 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep, my mind racing through everything that could go wrong, every way the family could be proven right about me after all. What if this client was a fluke? What if I couldn't sustain this? What if Marcus's company could do in a week what took me months? The difference now was that I had evidence to fight back against the doubt. When the voice in my head said I wasn't good enough, I could pull up analytics showing engagement rates that exceeded industry standards. When fear whispered that I'd gotten lucky, I could review the strategic decisions I'd made that directly led to improved results. The doubt was still there. I don't think it ever fully disappears. But it had competition now, data and outcomes that argued loudly for my competence. I learned to acknowledge the doubt without letting it make decisions for me, to say, I hear you, but we're doing this anyway. What helped most was remembering that everyone successful I admired had probably felt this same doubt, had pushed through similar moments of uncertainty. The difference between people who made it and people who didn't wasn't the absence of doubt. It was the refusal to let doubt have the final word. So on the days when fear screamed loudest, I'd take a deep breath, review my wins, remember Marcus's face, and get back to work. Not because I felt confident, but because confidence is built through action, not granted before it. Every time I chose to work despite the doubt, I proved to myself that I was stronger than the fear, more committed than the uncertainty, and absolutely determined to see this through. Time has this wonderful way of making people forget their own cruelty, of softening the edges of memories until the perpetrators convince themselves they were never that bad. As months went by and I maintained my distance from family gatherings, the active mockery faded into something more passive, occasional comments in group chats that I ignored, secondhand questions passed through Daniel about when I'd start being part of the family again. They moved on to other targets, other dramas, and I became less of a punchline and more of a mystery, which was exactly what I wanted. Daniel reported that they'd started asking about me differently, with a curiosity that bordered on concern. Is Lauren okay? She's been so distant, his mother said during one dinner. Marcus apparently made fewer jokes about me, possibly because there's no satisfaction in mocking someone who isn't present to react. Jenna asked Daniel if we were having marriage problems, fishing for gossip she could spread and sympathize over. But Daniel, to his credit, had learned to deflect their questions with the same vague answers I'd taught him. She's busy with work. She's doing great. She just needs space right now. He was protecting me in the only way he knew how, and I appreciated it more than I could express. The fading of their attention created the perfect cover for my continued growth. While they were distracted by their own lives and convinced I was sulking somewhere in irrelevant obscurity, I was closing deals, building my portfolio, establishing relationships with clients who actually valued my work. Every month brought new opportunities, referrals from satisfied clients, invitations to consult on projects, a reputation that was spreading quietly through professional networks that had nothing to do with family connections. I was becoming known in circles they didn't even know existed, building credibility they couldn't measure or diminish. And the invisibility they'd once used to shame me had become my greatest strategic advantage. The beautiful thing about people who've decided who you are is that they stop looking for evidence that you've changed. Marcus had labeled me as unmotivated and mediocre, so in his mind, that's exactly what I remained, frozen in time at that disastrous dinner where he'd torn me apart. Daniel's parents had decided I was a nice girl who lacked ambition, and that narrative was comfortable enough that they never questioned it. Jenna assumed I was jealous of her accomplishments and too proud to admit it. They'd all written their versions of my story, and it never occurred to them that I was off writing my own. This assumption became my invisibility cloak, allowing me to operate completely under their radar while they remained confident in their understanding of who I was. When they thought of me at all, which wasn't often, they probably pictured me still at my customer service job, still struggling, still exactly where I'd been a year ago. The idea that I'd transformed, that I was thriving, that I'd built something impressive without their knowledge or approval, it would have been incomprehensible to them, so they simply didn't consider it. Their arrogance blinded them, and I exploited that blindness ruthlessly. I could have corrected their assumptions at any point, could have shown up at a dinner and casually mentioned my success, but that would have robbed me of the moment I'd been building toward. I wanted them to find out all at once, in a context where denial was impossible, where they'd be forced to confront the fact that they'd completely misjudged me. Letting them believe I was still stuck wasn't weakness or deception. It was strategy, the final stage of a plan I'd been executing since that first night in the shower, when I'd decided that silence and patience would be my weapons of choice. They thought they were winning by default, completely unaware that I'd changed the game entirely. 14 months after that horrible dinner, everything changed with a single email. Rebecca's company was hosting an industry awards ceremony. They'd been nominated for Best Digital Marketing Campaign of the Year, specifically for the work I'd done with them. And they wanted me there, not as a guest, but as their featured strategist, the person who'd be called on stage if they won. "Lauren, this is your campaign as much as ours," Rebecca wrote. "You need to be there when we accept this award. Non-negotiable." My heart stopped when I read those words, then started again, faster, harder, filled with a mix of terror and exhilaration that made my hands shake. The event was formal, prestigious, the kind of gathering where industry leaders and major companies sent their executives and top talent. I knew without checking that Marcus's firm would be there. They were always at these events, networking and maintaining their reputation. I knew Daniel's family would hear about it somehow, because success in professional circles has a way of traveling to personal ones. This was it, the moment I'd been unconsciously building toward, the reveal I'd been protecting by staying silent for over a year. If you've stuck with this story, waiting to see how it all unfolds, make sure you're subscribed because what happened that night exceeded even my wildest expectations. I didn't tell Daniel about the nomination at first, partially because I was superstitious and didn't want to jinx it, but mostly because I needed time to process what this meant. If Rebecca's company won, I'd be standing on a stage in front of hundreds of industry professionals, being publicly recognized for work that Marcus and his family had no idea I was capable of. The validation would be undeniable, witnessed, permanent. And if we didn't win, well, the nomination itself was already more than I'd dared hope for a year ago. Either way, my silence was about to break in the most spectacular way possible, and there was no going back from what came next. The night of the awards ceremony, I stood in front of our bedroom mirror wearing a dress I'd bought specifically for this moment. Elegant, professional, confident without being flashy. Daniel stood behind me, adjusting his tie, still not fully grasping the magnitude of what was about to happen. "I'm really proud of you, babe," he said, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice even if he didn't understand the full context. I'd finally told him about the nomination 2 days before, framing it as a nice professional recognition, downplaying it enough that he wouldn't accidentally mention it to his family before I was ready. Tonight, ready or not, everyone would know. We arrived at the venue, a luxury hotel ballroom filled with round tables covered in white linens, a stage at the front with dramatic lighting, hundreds of people in formal wear networking and laughing and projecting success. I scanned the room and felt my stomach drop when I spotted them. Marcus, looking smug in an expensive suit, holding court at a table near the front with colleagues from his firm. Daniel's parents were there too, guests of a family friend's company, and even Jenna had somehow scored an invitation through her job. They hadn't seen me yet, were too absorbed in their own conversations, and I felt a surge of something between panic and savage satisfaction. "Lauren Hayes?" A coordinator with a clipboard found me near our table. "You're seated in the VIP section with the other nominees. Follow me, please." Daniel's eyes widened as we were led past the general seating, past Marcus's table, where I felt his eyes track our movement with confusion, to a section cordoned off at the front where the evening's featured campaigns were seated. The name cards at our table read like a who's who of digital marketing success. And there, right between two industry veterans, was my name in elegant script. Lauren Hayes, lead strategist. I sat down, felt Daniel squeeze my hand under the table, and prepared for the moment that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about me. The ceremony began with opening remarks and sponsor acknowledgments, but I barely heard any of it. My entire focus was on the table 20 feet behind me where I could feel eyes boring into my back. Marcus's eyes, specifically, trying to piece together why I was sitting in the nominees section while he was watching from general seating. During the networking break before the main awards, I saw him approach our table, that familiar cocky stride slowed by visible confusion. "Lauren?" he said, his voice uncertain in a way I'd never heard before. "What are you doing up here? Are you with someone's team?" I turned to face him, smiled pleasantly, and said, "I'm nominated, lead strategist for the Riverside e-commerce campaign." The color drained from his face. Within minutes, the news had spread to his table, to Daniel's parents, to Jenna. I watched from my seat as they huddled together, phones out, probably searching for my name in the ceremony program or Googling the campaign I'd worked on. Their faces cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked uncomfortably like panic as they realized they'd completely missed a massive shift in my professional life. Daniel's mother caught my eye across the room and gave a small, uncertain wave that I returned with calm confidence. No smugness, no gloating. I didn't need to perform victory because the situation spoke for itself. They'd come to this event expecting to network and feel important, and instead they were confronting the fact that the family member they'd dismissed was being honored alongside industry leaders. Curiosity had pulled them into my orbit, but it wasn't respect. Not yet. It was shock. The desperate, scrambling need to recalibrate their understanding of who I was now versus who they'd decided I would always be. Jenna tried to approach during another break, probably fishing for information she could use to diminish this somehow, but I was swept into conversation with other nominees before she could reach me. Let them wonder. Let them scramble. Let them feel the discomfort of realizing they'd been completely, embarrassingly wrong. The ceremony was about to resume, and soon they'd have no choice but to watch as their assumptions about me were demolished in the most public way possible. When our category was announced, Best Digital Marketing Campaign of the Year, my heart hammered so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The presenter began describing the winning campaign without naming it first. This year's winner demonstrated exceptional strategic thinking, delivering a 340% increase in conversion rates and a 520% ROI over 6 months for a struggling e-commerce brand. The campaign's innovative approach to audience segmentation and personalized messaging set a new standard for our industry. I knew those numbers. I'd lived those numbers. Rebecca grabbed my hand under the table and whispered, "That's us. Oh my God, Lauren, that's us." The award goes to Riverside e-commerce, led by strategist Lauren Hayes. The applause erupted as I stood, and in that moment, I wasn't thinking about Marcus or the family or revenge. I was thinking about every 3 a.m. work session, every rejected pitch, every shower cry, every moment I'd chosen to keep going when quitting would have been easier. I walked to that stage with my head high, not because I was trying to prove anything to them anymore, but because I'd already proven it to myself. Rebecca met me there. We accepted the award together, and when I looked out at the audience, I saw Daniel standing and clapping with genuine pride. Saw Marcus frozen in his seat with an expression I couldn't quite read. Saw Daniel's parents whispering urgently to each other. I gave a brief acceptance speech, thanking Rebecca's team and the clients who'd trusted me, keeping it professional and gracious because vindication doesn't require cruelty. As I walked off that stage, award in hand, cameras flashing, I realized something profound. The revenge I'd been building toward wasn't about making them feel bad. It was about making myself undeniable. Their opinions hadn't changed my worth. They'd never had that power. What had changed was my refusal to let their limitations define my possibilities. The room shifted, power changed hands, and I understood that I hadn't won by shouting or confronting or demanding they see me differently. I'd won by becoming someone they couldn't ignore, couldn't diminish, couldn't reduce to a punchline at family dinners. And that victory was mine to keep, regardless of what happened next. After the ceremony ended, Marcus approached me with something that almost looked like respect, muttering congratulations that tasted like ashes in his mouth. Daniel's parents were effusive suddenly, asking questions they should have asked a year ago, and Jenna couldn't quite make eye contact. But the most meaningful moment came when Daniel pulled me aside, eyes shining, and said, "I should have defended you. I should have seen this. I'm so sorry, and I'm so proud of you." I forgave him in that moment, not because the hurt disappeared, but because holding on to it would have poisoned the victory I'd earned. The truth revealed itself without me saying a word. No explanations necessary, no defensive justifications, just undeniable proof that they'd underestimated me catastrophically. No apology could erase what silence had proven, that patience and strategic growth are more powerful than any comeback. I didn't win by shouting. I won by becoming someone whose success spoke louder than their doubts ever could. The family dynamics shifted permanently that night, not because they suddenly respected me, but because I no longer needed them to. After hearing my story, what would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted them earlier, or was the quiet approach the right move? Do you believe revenge ever truly brings peace? Or does proving people wrong just open a new chapter? Let me know in the comments, because I want to hear your perspective on whether silence or confrontation is the better path when family tears you down. If you want more stories like this about quiet transformations and unexpected victories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Don't miss the next video where I'll share what happened at the first family dinner after that award ceremony. Because trust me, that conversation was even more satisfying than the award itself.